What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I was going to show you how to care and repot my bird of paradise. Now, the only common names I know for this plant is the bird of paradise or the crane flower. I believe this one is called the Strelitzia nicolai. And then the common is Strelitzia reginae for the scientific names. And the common one is the kind of orange one. Nicolai is the white one. So there is the giant white bird of paradise, the white bird of paradise, and then the more common, which is the Strelitzia reginae, and that's the kind of orange and blue color bird of paradise. Now, they get their common name because their flowers resemble a bird sticking its head out, kind of like from these giant clumps of flowers. So if you've seen any of these flowers, they really do kind of resemble one of those like fancy, prettier birds that are kind of found in the jungles, nicknamed the birds of paradise also, and that's where the common name comes from for this plant as well. So they are native to around South Africa. It does kind of have more of a temperate climate, so it isn't really kind of tropic, it's more of the subtropic area. So it will do really well in the USDA climate zones of 10 and 11. And then if it's kind of protected or in the warmer parts in the USDA zone 9, it can actually do quite well there as well. I actually got this guy from a friend, and he said that he didn't know what he was ordering, but upon further investigation, I believe he said that he thinks it's the white bird of paradise, but it's probably the common one. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you how to take care of both of those. Starting out with this guy is a little seedling, and he's in a 4-inch pot. Now, once you get these, whether you grow them from seed or you get them online or however you may receive your plant, once it gets about 4 leaves on a seedling, you can go ahead and transplant it from its 4-inch pot on up to about a 6-inch pot. Now, this guy has about 8 leaves getting ready to come in, so he's a little bit past due and in much need of a bigger pot or a bigger home. Now, true with these guys, they don't really kind of flower until they get way more mature, and typically they like to be really root bound when they do go ahead and produce flowers. So you do kind of want to pay attention to that, but do be warned, they do have rhizomes under here that kind of spread out and help them kind of grow bigger and advance a little bit. So if you can kind of squeeze your pot and it feels like he's pretty tight in there, he's probably overdue for a repot. I think that's where I'm at right now because he doesn't look his best. And as you can tell, the older leaves are looking a little yellow. Some of the newer leaves have a little bit of yellow and brown on here that tells me he hasn't been receiving a whole bunch of water, and the curling of the leaves also tell me that too. So if you notice that your bird of paradise, the leaves are beginning to kind of curl, that is usually an indication that it doesn't have enough water or enough humidity in its environment. So you want to address that as soon as possible and give the guy some water so he doesn't die, and then increase the humidity as well. Now, truth be told, with these birds of paradise, they really do like sunlight. Now, that's the established ones that are a little bit older, but for the newer ones that are either in a store or younger ones that are in a store that don't really get a whole lot of sunlight, or they've just been out of commission for a while, you don't want to throw them back into the sunlight and just leave them there. You want to introduce them slowly because their leaves can take the direct sunlight, but if it's been a while since it's been in the path of direct light, you can scorch them and burn them and cause a lot of problems with it. So if you do have a newer one that you just bought from a store, or if you're not entirely sure how much direct sunlight it's had, introduce them slowly. It's better to be safe than sorry. Now, they can kind of grow somewhat in lower light conditions, but they'll really thrive when they do have more direct sunlight. If you look it up, it will say that they can take some direct sunlight, but really they kind of need indirect sunlight. But I find that they really do well if they do have a decent amount of light. Now, if you want to put them under artificial light or just in a better exposure of a window and maybe scoot it back a little bit, that's your prerogative. But since I got him probably about 2 weeks ago, I've had him under the LEDs, hoping to give him a little bit more brighter light for a little bit longer to kind of help him out. Now, I can tell that he's doing okay because in the center here, he does have a new leaf that's coming out. So they do kind of look like little spears that shoot up, but that's just a new leaf coming in that hasn't unfurled or unrolled yet. Other than that, I can really tell that he has had a little bit of a rough start here. So I'm hoping to kind of correct most of these conditions and be able to tell you how to better care for this guy, but this may be a little bit of a work in progress. And as always, I'll try to update you on that and let you know how they go. As I meant to say earlier, these guys used to actually be classified into the banana family. As we know now, they're not really, they're more like the legumes. They do have leaves that do resemble banana plants, but they are in their own family. This really does come into consideration whenever you're talking about classification and taxonomy. So just for your own benefit, know that they are a part of their own family, and that is for the birds of paradise. Now, typically they are grown just because of their flowers. I mean, everybody thinks that they are really beautiful, and if they have enough light, enough water, and they are in a pot, and they're pot bound, they will produce flowers. But doing that indoors typically is a little bit harder than having the plant in the ground outside, where you will see them flower all the time. And I'm not saying it's impossible to get them to flower, but it is a little bit harder to get them to flower if they live indoors. Typically people will actually move them out in the spring and summer to get them better light, and then bring them back in for the fall and winter. They will not really survive a frost. If it's just a brief frost, they can probably take on a little bit of damage and be fine. But if you do forget about them, they probably will die because they don't like temperatures too low. I wouldn't expose them to temperatures lower than about 50 degrees because, as I said, they do come from kind of rather temperate regions, but they don't handle cold too well. Now, these plants were introduced in Europe about 1773. A local collector visited Africa and brought a couple specimens back to the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. Then in about 1853, they were introduced into California. So we have known about these plants for a little bit, and they've been house plants and kind of outside for a while, but they are very popular, mostly just because of their flowers, but I think their foliage is gorgeous too. As I said previously, they do like bright light, but they could probably take a little bit of protection and shade from the direct sunlight during the hotter part of the day. Typically, if you need to, I would put them in a south-facing window and scoot them back a little bit, or maybe have a sheer curtain or some blinds that you can kind of close to kind of diffuse the light a bit whenever it gets too hot and too bright for them. And then with water, you really kind of want to keep the soil moist most of the year. You typically want to have the consistency of a wrung-out sponge. And then if the top inch or 2 inches rather dries out, you want to go ahead and water them again. They really do like to have a little bit of water around their roots, but they don't need to be standing in standing water all day. All that can introduce them into root rot and probably kill your plant, but they really do have a fine line between overwatering and underwatering. So just kind of keep that in mind. They do need to have a little bit of moisture, but typically if you have enough humidity in your environment, your plant will be rather happy. It will say that if you do some research that most humidity levels in the average home will be fine for this plant, but I find that humidities of around 40% or higher are kind of better beneficial for this plant. Now, all that being said, I want to go ahead and loosen this up so that I can go ahead and get him into his new pot. Now, I'm not going to squeeze too tight because I don't want to snap any rhizomes or any other kind of growth that may be in the soil right now that may kind of result in a newer leaf. So don't squeeze too tight, just enough to kind of loosen up the mass in the pot. Now I can tell that there is a little bit of growth sticking out of the bottom of the pot, which really does tell me that it is time to go ahead and transplant him. Now, because they are rather avid drinkers, you do want your soil to drain rather quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and use Miracle-Gro Cactus, Palm, and Citrus because it does have a lot of sand in there to help release any excess moisture or water that stays in the bottom around the roots. So I'll put in probably just under a quarter of the pot, maybe just a little bit above a quarter of the pot, and just kind of kick the soil up on the sides just to make a little divot in the center for the root mass to kind of sit in comfortably. Now I know that they do prefer to be slightly acidic in their soil pH. So I will sprinkle in a little bit of cocoa coir to kind of help him out there. So I don't want to do too much because I don't want to give him any kind of problems there. If you don't get the soil's pH right, you can really affect the amount of nutrients or what the plant is able to uptake and hold on to. So make sure that you know what you're doing when it comes to the amount of acidity added in, and then make sure you read the directions on the back of the bag that will tell you about how much you need per any given size of your plant. And as always, I have my little bucket underneath me to catch any of this debris, and I do have my sanitized scissors to kind of help me cut him out, which I do believe I probably will end up needing since one of his rhizomes is caught down in the bottom of the pot. And yeah, he's not coming out. So I will take the scissors and just kind of cut down in here and take my time. You really don't want to damage the roots down in here if you can help it. Now, as I said, they don't really like to have their roots mess with a whole bunch, so I'm going to take him and just sit him down in the center of the pot and then sprinkle in some soil instead of roughing up the roots, just to kind of loosen them up a bit. And as always, you really should sanitize your pot before you put a new plant in there as well, especially if you just bought your container, because you don't know what's sat down in there, what's died, who's touched it, how long it's been there, and you really just don't know too much about that. So if you really want your plant to start out at a healthy kind of level and have a better beginning, I would go ahead and sanitize the container that it's going to be in with hot soap and water and a little scrub brush too. And now, because I've added in more soil, I'll sprinkle in a little bit more cocoa coir, and then as you add the soil, just kind of tamp it down around the roots. As we know, tamping it down will better secure your plant in its new home, and it'll get rid of any kind of air bubbles that may remain in there while putting in new soil. Now, you're not pressing hard to break any rhizomes or roots or anything of that nature. Instead, you're just kind of compacting the soil some. Alright, now I'm not going to go ahead and put in a whole bunch of soil all the way to the top of the container. I know that if you put in a bunch of mulch around the plant, if you get it right up to the plant, it can actually introduce some rot to around there, so I'm not going to go ahead and fill him all the way up with soil. Instead, I'm going to put it right up to about where the leaves are beginning to kind of branch off from the plant. Alright, and now in addition to the white bird of paradise and the orange bird of paradise, there was a variety called Mandela's Gold, which is a yellow bird of paradise that was introduced in around 1996. So along with the white and the orange, you do now have yellow bird of paradise as well. Following transplanting, the next thing I need to do is go ahead and water him to kind of make sure that I get rid of any other air bubbles that may have been trapped in by the new soil that tamping may have missed. Now, if you begin to notice any kind of splits or tears in the leaf, most of this is kind of normal. It is kind of brought on by nature with the wind. So if you notice a whole bunch of areas that kind of split, they may need to be protected from kind of strong winds, but most of that is pretty natural, that kind of prevent the leaves from acting like giant cells and kind of uprooting the plant. So you will notice some kind of tears in the leaves, but that's normal. Along with that, the only other thing I really want to mention on this plant is pests. Now, typically the main cause for pests and alert on a bird of paradise would be mealybugs or scale. But also, they do have a little bit of a problem with grasshoppers, snails, and caterpillars, which usually all make their presence known by having little bite marks in the leaves. And then, as always, if you do have a little saucer underneath your pot, or you have a cache pot like I do, make sure that you empty the saucer underneath after about 20 minutes. At that point, that's really all the plant is going to be able to absorb with the water. And if you leave a whole bunch of excess water in there with nowhere to go, that is what's going to end up killing your plant due to root rot. So just make sure you pay attention and don't forget to empty the saucer because all that excess water that the plant's not going to use needs to have somewhere to go. If not, the soil is going to remain saturated, the roots won't be able to breathe, and the plant will die. Now these plants do get rather large, especially the giant bird of paradise, the giant white bird of paradise rather, and they are kind of long-lived. So just be prepared to have a plant that may be in your family for quite some time. You may have to make some plans for it later on down the road, but they are a great joy to have just because of their great dramatic foliage and their flowers as well. Now the last thing I wanted to go ahead and mention is the toxicity of the bird of paradise. It is toxic to dogs, cats, birds, and people, but they do have to ingest a whole bunch to actually make them pretty sick. So just be careful and mindful if you do have any kind of pet or a little one running around that likes to put things in their mouth, because that could be a problem potentially down the road, especially with any kind of leaf loss. Now typically you do have to cut some of the dead leaves off, but if they are completely dead, you might be able to go ahead and pull them out of the soil, so just make sure you're paying attention to that. And if you got your bird of paradise hoping to get flowers, it could take anywhere from 3 to 5 years before they are mature enough to begin producing flowers. And if you're noticing that yours is past that point and it's not producing any flowers at all, check the light and then check its root mass, because like I said, they do need a good amount of light to produce the flowers, a decent amount of water, humidity, and they do like to be pot bound in order to go ahead and throw up the flowers that we so know and love. Well guys, that's really all I know about this plant and wanted to say. If you do have any kind of questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comment section below and let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures with the bird of paradise. I really hope that this is the white bird of paradise, but even if it is the yellow or the orange, I'd be happy because those flowers are stunning. If you do know anybody that has one of these plants or has any problems with them, please feel free to share my video. That always helps me out tremendously. And until next time guys, take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.